hold them in our prayer, but support them through our church and our resources, and continue to pray for those ministries that do that. And to start this series off on this Sunday, I'm starting a series called on Giant Shoulders, kind of a subcaption, Sermons with Thurman, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. But in order to get us kind of in the rhythm of where we're going to go over the next few weeks, I just want to play a mental game with you for a few minutes, and I want you to kind of track with me here for a minute. Ask yourself this question, see what kind of answer you come up with. What would it take for you to trade your house? What would it take for you to trade your house? Would it be another house, maybe of equal or greater value than the house that you're living in right now? Would it be like the perpetual lifelong health of a loved one, maybe? Like if you know someone who's struggling in your life and you're like, you'll trade your house, I'll make sure that they never struggle with illness, that they never die, you know? Like if you always have this bet with your spouse, like who's going to die first, like we'll just clarify, you're going to die first. That's how it's going to work, right? It's where we'll go with this. But like, what would it take for you to trade your house? You know, it could be bigger than, smaller than, whatever it may be. And then I want to ask you the second question, a different one. What would it take, or would you ever be willing to trade your house for this? And just in case you can't see it, we'll put it up on the screen behind me here. It's a paper clip. All right? Would you ever be willing to trade your house for this? Who could possibly imagine actually trading a house for this right here? But this is exactly what a guy by the name of Kyle McDonald in July of 2005 set out to do. He took a red paper clip and he said, I want to trade this paper clip, I want to barter, I want to do whatever I can to trade for a house. And believe it or not, within 12 months with 14 trades, Kyle McDonald traded a paper clip to arrive at a 2-story house, and he received the keys to that house. It was a long journey. I mean, he started out with this red paper clip. He traded it in for a handmade doorknob. He traded the doorknob in for a Coleman camp stove. He traded that in for a generator, and a generator in for an instant party. And in case you're wondering what an instant party was, it's an empty beer keg and a Budweiser Light, which, you know, I'm like, that's what it is. Just stop right there. Who cares about a house? But he didn't. He traded that in, unbelievably, and he traded that in for a snowmobile. Traded the snowmobile in for a trip to Yak, which I don't have any idea where that is in the world, nor do I really want to go there. He traded that trip in to Yak for a box truck, the box truck for a recording contract. The recording contract he traded in for a year's rent in Phoenix. A year's rent in Phoenix he traded in for an afternoon with Alex Cooper, which again, like, are you really going to go any further than that? You could spend an afternoon with Alice Cooper. Who cares about anything else? He traded that in for a snow globe. Like, what happened? Like something. He had a really bad bender one night, and that's what happened. Traded that in for a snow globe, took the snow globe, traded it in for a paid role in a movie, and it was that paid role in a movie that guaranteed him a 2-story house in Saskatchewan, which I'm not sure I'd care for a house there, but he got a house out of a paperclip. Through 14 trades, he got his house out of a paperclip. And on the surface, this trade seems absolutely absurd. And when we think back about my original question, would you be willing to trade a house for a paperclip? Most of us are probably like, that's insane. I would never do that. But he trades all the way up to arrive at this house right here, to where he can move in, and now he's actually traded the house for something better and moved on in his life. And this house is a cafe that I guess you can go and visit at any point in time if you want. And it seems absurd that this would happen. It seems absurd that someone would be able to start with this little meaningless object right here and trade enough to arrive at that. But the reason that I think it seems absurd in our minds as we think through this is because so often in our lives we operate on this one-to-one basis. I'm going to give $50. I'm going to assume I'll receive $50 in product in return. I'm going to give an hour of my time. I'm assuming that I'm going to receive an hour's worth of product or some sort of value in return. We have this one-to-one basis that we so often work on, where it says, I will sow and I will reap in equal or greater amounts in response to what I sow. In fact, I just want you to think about how broadly this goes. This weekend is a weekend where we as a country decide to set some time aside and remember a key figure in our nation's history, Martin Luther King Jr. And there's no doubt that this was an incredible man, an incredible leader, a brilliant mind, and fantastic orator. But when we set this weekend aside, what we say is that he is standing up as a single human being who has done an incredible thing to transform the world around us. And we forget, and I don't think he would have forgotten this, We forget that he stands on the shoulders of all those who went before him. His work is really only accomplished because of all the work that was done prior to him coming into the world and the way he lived in this world. He stood on the shoulders of giants. And from there, his dream is being able to become realized and shaped in the world around us. And what's true for MLK is true for us in our lives, whether we're people of faith or not. It's true for us in the life that we live now. Where we are today, the world that we live in today, is because of a great cloud of witnesses that have gone before us, people who've come before us, and we stand today on their shoulders, operating and moving and living on their past legacy and what they've handed on to us. And that's why I'm doing this series, because I want us for just a few minutes and for the next few weeks, I want us to hear the stories of those who have gone before us so we can better understand where we're going, to look back in order to look forward. In this particular series, I focused it in on this one man right here, Howard Thurman. Now, his name may be unfamiliar to you, as is fine. That's to be the case. It was not unfamiliar to MLK at all. This was MLK's, one of his greatest spiritual mentors in his life. And this was a man who was not only an incredible preacher and communicator of the gospel and teacher in several universities, he was also a man of many firsts. He was the first African American to ever be dean at a white university. He was the first church planter of a multiracial, multi-ethnic church in the world in San Francisco, which still stands today. He planted that multiracial church in the 1940s. In fact, when he planted that church. It's still around today. He was the first African American to ever have met Gandhi. And as I said already, he was a spiritual mentor to MLK. Now, the reason that I think it's important to start with him is not just because he's a man of firsts and because he indeed was the spiritual mentor to this person that we think about today. But the reason I think it's really important to start with him is because as a person, and he writes about this many times, he's a person who deeply believed that our decisions today, right now, are decisions that have lasting impact in the world of tomorrow. They will outlive us. They will go beyond us. In fact, he would suggest as he looks at history, he says, there's never been a historical event that has risen on the backs of one person. Every historical happening, every transformation that we see throughout history is an overlapping pattern of group behavior. There's people who have come together to make history happen and to make this happen. And if this is the case, then we're living in this complex world where there are tons of shoulders that we're standing on, and there's an interweaving and interconnectedness of our lives that's really important. And don't miss what he's saying in this regard. This is huge. So often we live in the world where we think it's a world of our own making, that we've done this. But he's suggesting that the one that we're really living in is a world that brick by brick has been made by others before us. And we're standing in it and operating in it. And if this is true of the world that we've inherited, and this is where it's going to get really heavy for us today, and I'm going to ask you to respond in a particular way. If it's true that we stand in the world that we have inherited, then it's also true that one day someone will stand on our shoulders in a world that they've inherited. One day we will be the ones who have the shoulders that others stand on, and we will be the creators or co-creators of a world that is to come, a world that still lies ahead of us. And this isn't an idea that really originated with Thurman. I mean, he talks about it time and time again, and he has a whole book where he unpacks this. This is actually something that's deeply grounded in his faith and the faith that we share as Christians. I mean, think about this for a minute. Jesus is one who taps into the history of the prophets over and over. He's quoting the prophets throughout his ministry. He's offering those teachings and pulling them back out. If you think about Paul's writings for just a few minutes, the Apostle Paul, when he describes the community of faith, he talks about it like it's a body, like this parts. Each of us form a different part of the body, and one cannot exist without the other, and we all sort of flow together. We see this, and I've mentioned this phrase already, the cloud of witnesses, but that comes from Hebrews. The author of Hebrews says we're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, all those who go before us that kind of form and shape the world around us. And this goes all the way back, and I read a portion of this story a minute ago, but it goes all the way back to King David when King David took an offering. He took this incredible offering, and for just a few minutes today, I want to unpack actually the complexities of him taking that offering and what he said in the middle of that in 1 Chronicles 29. Because David kicks this off, this grand celebration of building the temple of the Lord by collecting all the resources necessary to build it. And this is a huge time, right? The people of Israel have never had a temple where they can go to worship God. God has never had a house in their history that is stable, solid, firmly built, beautiful, but never had that. And so King David has this vision given to him by God to build the temple. And the first step in all of that, of course, is to collect the resources to do so, to come together as a people and bring their offerings and their gifts. And David does something that's just astronomical. He immediately comes out and he doesn't ask his subjects to do something that he's not willing to do. So the very first thing he does is he brings his gifts. And he brings them in abundance. He brings gold and silver and bronze and iron and metal and all kinds of gems and wood, all these building materials, and he puts them down at the altar, and he brings his gift. And in response to him bringing his gifts, all the leaders within Israel, they bring their gifts. They're inspired by his generosity, and so they just start pouring in thousands of talents of gold and silver and all these different things, and they come. And then the people see this, and the people are so inspired, they rejoice. In fact, verse 9 says, "Then the people rejoiced because they had given willingly, for with single mind they had offered freely to the Lord." It's going to be magnificent. We're so excited about the way this is going to be built. We know, the people would suggest, this will change the course of history. This is going to change everything for the way that we understand God and worship God. And not only that, but it'll change everything for our political environment. The way we engage with the rest of the world, what kind of powerhouse we as a country are going to be in this ancient world. They knew that that was going to happen. And David acknowledges this as well. In verse 10, he goes on, he turns to God in praise and adoration. He says, yours, O Lord, yours is the greatness, the power, the glory, the victory, the majesty. For all that is on heaven and on earth, it's all yours. And we give all this glory back to you. He acknowledges that over and over again. But then in verse 14, his tone begins to change. And it's interesting because he's so excited and happy in these first few verses. Verse 14, he turns back to the people and to himself, and he's still talking to God. And he says, but who am I? Who am I? And what is my people like that we should be able to make this free will offering? I mean, after all things come from you. Everything is poured out from you. It's all your gift. I don't know why we would receive any praise or honor in the midst of this or any glory. For all is from you, and of your own have we given. Right? We've given back to you just what was yours to begin with, God. That's how this thing works. And this stuff never belonged to us to begin with. And in fact, he takes this one step further, and this is an important foundational reality to what he's going to talk about in just a few minutes. In this next verse, verse 15, he says, for we are, and you can underline these two words, we are aliens and transients. That's who we are. That's who you and I are. We're just simply passing through this world. We're temporary residents of this created order. God, you are the one who exists above all things, above all of history. You oversee it all, and you are the constant touch point in all of it. But we're aliens and transients. And even our ancestors, we love them. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all of them, we love them. They're great. They've got some good stories, not so good stories as well, but they've got some good stories. We love them, but they were transients, and they only passed through. Our days, oh God, are like a shadow. There is no hope. And by that, he doesn't mean, there's no hope of, like restoration or anything like that. He just means that's how it is. Our day is a shadow. It's fleeting. It goes away. That's just reality, folks. We will, the death rate, the mortality rate, last time I checked, is still 100%. That's going to happen. Whether we like it or not, that's going to roll out. And he says at the end, there's no hope of that changing. And so he concludes it in this way. He says, O Lord, our God, all this abundance that we have provided for in building you a house for your holy name, it comes from your hand and is all your own. So we bring these things to you. We play our part in the story of your world. But listen how he concludes as he taps back into the ancestors. He says, O Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, our ancestors, those who've gone before us, those who have tilled up the ground that they never reaped from and that we're now reaping from, those, God, all of our ancestors, keep forever such purposes and thoughts in the hearts of your people and direct their hearts towards you. Don't ever, he says this, he says, don't ever let us forget that we get to play a part. We have a small sliver of what you're doing in the world, but ultimately you're the main actor. You're the one who oversees all things. You're the one who's guiding this. You're the one who stands throughout all of history. And so please help us keep these purposes. Help us keep these thoughts. Help us keep all of these things in mind. And then he does something that just baffles the people. Because they didn't see this coming. Remember, they've gathered an offering together. They've put this on the altar because they're in anticipation of building a temple. And then at the very end, the very last thing he prays about this, he turns to his son Solomon. So don't miss, in verse 18, he looks back at the ancestors and what God has done in them that has brought them to this moment. And then in verse 19, he looks forward to his son. And he says, "And now, grant to my son Solomon that the single mind he may keep your commands, your decrees, and your statutes, performing all of them." And at this point, the people in Israel are like, okay, yeah, we definitely need to. He's a king's son. He's got a little rebellious streak in him, I saw him out town Friday night. It wasn't good, right? Like, they get it. We need to pray for him. But then he finishes it out in this way. He says, "And grant that my son Solomon may build the temple for which I have made provision." And at that point, this is one of those places, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but like, I've been in those environments where everybody's like bowed and praying, and the preacher will say something, and it's just off the wall, and they're like, what just happened? Like one eye just raises, one's still down, the other one's way up, like that. That's what happened in this moment. There's praying, "God, we just pray that you would use Solomon, that he would keep your commands, that he would do all this stuff, and God, help him build this temple." And they're like, whoa, wait. David, just a minute. It's cool that we want to pray for your son. I'm sure one day he'll take over. But if you met him, like, he hadn't had his thing with God yet where he's wise. Like, that's not happened at this point. So I'm not sure it's so good for us to assume that all the money that we've collected and put into this place and all the time and energy that we're putting in, I don't know that I want to hand it off to him. That's not what I'm thinking, right? And David steps back. He says, all that we have made provision for, God, help him build. David was saying, in essence, as he finished this prayer, he was saying, I'm going to give. I'm going to play my part. I'm going to invest in this time and season knowing that I will never worship in that space. I'm going to give to a project that God will make happen in this world, and it's real that it will happen, but Solomon will build, and Solomon will reap the harvest that we've planted here today. We will give in this way, and we'll give faithfully, and we'll do all that, but some other generation will take it from there. All that we will have done on this day, it will be realized in a day to come. And when that day comes, Solomon's court, all the people who are living in that day, they will come forward and they will stand on our shoulders and they will build this house for God. David knew that if God really is sovereign over all things, if God is the one who hovers over all history, then we indeed play a part in what God is asking us to do in the world. But let us never forget, it's only one part. It's only one part of what God is doing in the grand narrative of history. And the part that we're called to play is never going to be separate from those who went before us, and it will not be disconnected from those who come after us. With every action that we perform, every move that we make, we are sowing something into the ground. And where there's sowing, there's going to be reaping. Paul says in Galatians chapter 6, he says, hey, please don't be deceived. Don't be deceived. God is not going to be mocked. He says, for you reap whatever you sow. Whatever it is, if you sow to the flesh, you'll reap to the flesh. You'll reap from the flesh. If you sow to the Spirit, you'll reap from the Spirit. He says, don't be deceived. This is a law of reality that wherever you sow, you will also reap. But what Paul doesn't spell out for us, and what we often get confused, is when harvest time is. When is the reaping? When does that come due, and when are we supposed to step into that? Because even though Paul spells out this principle of sowing and reaping, he doesn't state clearly when the season of reaping will come. And that, friends, that right there is the real question that lies before us. In every season of our life and every aspect of our life, whether it's our professional lives, our family lives, our community lives, our church life, whatever it is, where is the sowing and where is the reaping? And in what way will we be found faithful in this process that ultimately we're not in charge of, but that God oversees and invites us to be a part of? You know, one of Thurman's most famous stories, and I'm wrapping up, Becky, you can come back up. One of Thurman's most famous stories is a story he told of an 81-year-old man that he ran across in LaGrange, Georgia. Now, he says it better than I do, but he says basically he's coming down the road one day, and as he's going down the road, he sees this man who was up in his years, about 81, and the guy was sitting there planting on the side of the road a small grove of pecan trees, or I guess it's LaGrange, Georgia, and it's Rutherford, so maybe it's pecan. I don't know where you all fall on that spectrum there, whatever you think. Don't judge me, I'm going to say pecan the rest of the time. That's just how it's going to happen. You can hate me later, but I'm going pecan here. And it's pecan pie, too. It's pecan everything. There's no peeing in a can. I'm not doing that. But it was LaGrange, Georgia. So he said pecan. He goes over and he sees that he's planting these pecan trees, and he looks at the man who's 81 years young, and he says, these trees they're 2.5, 3 feet high. Why didn't you buy bigger trees to plant? And I love the initial response. The guy just kind of was like straightforward. He's like, I'm old, and I don't have money. He's like, I didn't get them because I don't have the money to buy them, right? And he's like, I'm fixed income. You live in America as well. You know how this works. And he pushes him a little bit. Howard Thurman kind of looks back at him and he goes, so let me just ask you this. He goes, you and I are both smart people. I know you don't want to face your own mortality in the same way that I don't want to face my own mortality. But you don't really expect to see the fruit of these trees then. I mean, if you plant bigger trees, at least you'd get a cup of nuts out of this, at some point in time. You don't expect to live to see the trees? I mean, enough even to get a cup of nuts? And with all the confidence in the world, this 81-year-old man looks back at Howard Thurman and he goes, no. But is that important? And inside of all of us, there's something that goes, heck yeah, that's important. Right? There's a gut check that just hit us where it's like, no, yeah, it absolutely is important. If I'm going to plant, I want to reap. If I'm going to sow, I want to reap the benefits and the rewards. This is this 1-to-1 ratio that we have working in our minds. Wherever I'm going to go, I expect something back for it. Yes, it's important. I want the reward. I want the benefit. I want to see all what this work is good for, right? I want to see the house being finished, built. And of course I want that. And then he goes on, and I've put this in your notes if you want to see it or take it. We'll put it up on the screen too. But it's such a powerful quote that I didn't want us to miss what this octogenarian said. With all the wisdom that those years could bring, he looks back at Thurman, and he says, all my life, I've eaten fruit from trees that I did not plant. Why should I not plant trees to bear fruit for those who may enjoy them long after I'm gone? It's just a reality of our life. We have reaped a harvest in all these places that we have not planted. You know that. Each of us are in that space where we receive benefit after benefit, and we may not even know where they came from, but it's fields that someone else has planted, and now we're getting to take them. I met with our pastors in the group, our cooperative parish this week, and one of them he's actually a retired pastor, not too far from here, but he says on the property that he lives in, it's been held for generations. Right behind his house is an enormous pecan tree, and I said, well, who planted that? He said, my great-grandfather planted that. And just this past year, he planted 3 pecan trees next to his house, and as he looked at that old pecan tree, he didn't know I was preaching this at all. It was just kind of weird how it all worked out. But as he looked at that old pecan tree, he saw these new pecan trees, and he knew those are not for him. But hopefully, they will be for his great-grandchildren. The old man finishes his phrase off after he says that opening line. And Thurman comes back to this second line several times throughout his writings. And he says very plainly, he says, besides, the man who plants because he will reap the harvest has no faith in life. If you're just planning to reap the harvest, then you have no faith that there is something greater than you in existence in the world. That there is some overriding purpose that is there. If that's the only reason we plan is to reap, sow, reap, and we forget that what we're doing right now has impact on the world that's beyond us, then we've lost sight of our faithfulness in this world, of what God has called us to be a people that's not just a global people, but to be a people that's generationally a people. We say in our creed that I believe in one holy Catholic church, and the church historically put that final phrase, Catholic Church, in there, not so that we would remember that there is a global church in every country around the world, but the church put that final phrase, Catholic, in there to remind us that we are a church that exists throughout time. That those who have come before us and those who come after us will be overseen by a God who still cares. And it's our obligation to be faithful in the time that we are in, to live into it. And at some point, to understand that you not only stand on the shoulders of giants, but you have the choice to make. as to whether or not you will have gigantic shoulders for someone else to stand on. Make no ifs, ands, or buts about it. People will stand on your shoulders. But what will the nature of your shoulders be? And how will you form each decision today to make sure that you give them a firm foundation from which they stand on? I think we're all called to lead in some capacity in some place. Some of us are called to lead in our families. Some are called to lead in the community. Some are called to lead change in the world and in the world around us and in schools. We're all called to be leaders. But here's the truth. Good leaders will try to make decisions for everyone. But if David's example is true, then godly leaders will make decisions for every generation. They'll determine in their heart that it's not just about what's happening right now, but in light of my past, where am I heading in the future? And I will make decisions that will impact all of those who come after me. I'll try to lean into that and understand that our decisions in this life have ripple effects in the life that come, and they affect all those who come after me. So what's the future that you hope for? I mean, if I can get practical for just a minute, you're like, well, how do I live in this way? Here's how you can live in this way. You can wake up every day, and the decisions that you make, you can envision the end that you want to have in mind. You may not see that end. You may not ever arrive at it, but where do you want this story to end? And don't make a decision based on what's happening right now, but make a decision on where you want this story to end. The world that you want to see created. The harvest that you want someone to reap, even if it's not your own. So I can make the decision whether I'm going to plant pecan trees or tomatoes, all right? And that decision is based on the fruit at the end. Not whether or not I will receive that fruit, but what fruit do I want to arrive in this world? And as we think about this generationally, this next phrase that I'm going to say, I don't think this is true for everybody in every situation, but I do think there are some times in our lives where we have to just embrace the reality of this phrase. It's not always the case, but I often believe, and I've personalized this for all of us, that God may ask something of me for someone that I cannot see. And I put that in that first person because I want you to feel that way. God may ask something of you, someone that you can't see. And so we have to make these decisions not on today, but on tomorrow. Because God may ask us to plant in a field that we'll never reap from or harvest from. He might ask us to grow some fruit that we're never going to be able to enjoy. He may ask us to develop a world that we actually won't be able to live in, or to build a temple that we'll never be able to worship in, or to plant some pecan trees that only my great-grandchildren will eat off of and swing out of and feel the shadow of. I don't know what God is asking of us in this season and time, and I don't know where God is asking us to make decisions as individuals and families and community members and your businesses. But if we are to be found faithful, then in every aspect of our lives, we have to be making decisions, not only for today, but for tomorrow. And at the end of the day, that's really the only question I can leave you with. God doesn't ask us to, how much we've sown or how much we reaped. We're not held accountable to that. But God does ask us, and we see this over and over again, the way that he asks us if we have been found faithful. So that's my final question. Will you be found faithful? Will I be found faithful? Will we be found faithful with all that God has given to us and all that God has done? Do we have faith in this life that God is who he says he is and will oversee and take care of the entire world? Will we be faithful with our resources? Will we be faithful with our time? Will we be faithful in the world and caring for the world that God has given us? Will we be faithful to call that God, to call on him as individuals and as communities? Our faithfulness is really the only question that lies before us this morning. It's the only question that will accompany us towards eternity. Have we placed our faith in this God? And is our faithfulness seen in every aspect of our life? Do we bear the fruit of faithfulness today and tomorrow? Would you stand with me and pray? God, throughout all of history, we see the way that you have touched down in our lives and in our community. God, I know that even this morning, We're in this building, this space of brick and mortar because of the faithfulness of those who've gone before us. Faithful men and women who many of us may not know their names or their relationship with you or connection with you, but something as simple as this building was built with some who went before us, and now we stand on their shoulders. And as we go out from this place today, God, remembering and honoring those who've gone before us in the way that you've used them in this world, we ask, God, that you would help us be more intentional with how we create space for future generations, how we create room for others to stand on our shoulders, how we will be faithful with all the resources that are in front of us in the creation of a world that honors you and glorifies you. God, help us to pursue you with passion and with clarity. Above all, help us to pursue you with faithfulness, recognizing that we may sow in places where we will never reap, in the same way that we have so often reaped in fields that we didn't sow in. I thank you for those gifts, and I thank you for the many gifts that you continue to pour out upon us. Send us out of this place today rejoicing that you indeed are the God and Father of us all, who oversees all of our ordeals in life, and you will continue to carry us into tomorrow with your faithfulness to us, your people. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen and amen. Thank you so much for being here today. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. And if you're available at 3:30 today for the Martin Luther King celebration at First Baptist, I will